Welcome to our deep dive into the work of a philosopher you've probably never heard of, but trust me, you're going to want to know about him.
Right.
We're talking about Mário Ferreira dos Santos,
Oh,
a Brazilian thinker some call the Philosophus Brasiliensis.
interesting.
He was incredibly prolific, publishing nearly 100 books
Wow.
and leaving behind a mountain of unpublished manuscripts.
Really?
Yet, despite being considered one of the most important metaphysical thinkers of the 20th century, he remained relatively unknown, even in his own country.
That's fascinating how someone so influential could remain under the radar for so long.
Exactly.
It's like stumbling upon a lost city of knowledge.
And the source material you provided is like a map to that city.
Oh, cool.
We're going to be exploring two key works.
Yeah.
His Enciclopedia das Ciências Filosóficas, a title that's a mouthful even for me.
Yeah.
And his book, A Sabedoria das Leis Eternas, which translates to The Wisdom of Eternal Laws.
Okay.
And believe me, these laws are anything but dry textbook material.
What's intriguing about Dos Santos is that he wasn't just trying to create another philosophical system.
Right.
He aimed to map the very structure of reality, the underlying principles that govern everything,
Wow.
from the smallest atom to the vast cosmos.
Okay, before we get lost in the cosmos,
Sure.
let's start with the man himself,
Ah.
who was Mário Ferreira dos Santos.
He was a true Renaissance man,
Mm.
a polymath who excelled in philosophy, writing, translating, journalism,
Wow.
even editing.
It seems his mind was constantly making connections between seemingly disparate fields, weaving together a tapestry of knowledge.
Yes.
But why did his work remain largely in obscurity? You'd think someone who published so much would have made a bigger splash.
It's a combination of factors, really.
Okay.
Academic biases often favor certain schools of thought.
Right.
And perhaps his unique synthesis of ideas, drawing from sources as diverse as Pythagoreanism and Thomism, didn't fit neatly into any pre-existing box.
So he was a bit of a rebel,
Yes.
forging his own path.
In a sense, yes.
And then there's the challenge of translating complex philosophical work,
Right.
especially from a language not as widely studied as,
Yeah.
say, French or German.
Yeah,
Plus, let's be honest, the sheer volume of his output can be intimidating.
it is.
Where do you even begin with 100 books and countless manuscripts?
Good question.
Well, luckily for us, we have this deep dive to guide us.
I'm glad.
So let's talk about that Enciclopedia das Ciências Filosóficas.
Okay.
What makes it so unique, and how does it reflect Dos Santos' philosophical approach?
The encyclopedia is divided into 3 series.
Okay.
It starts with an introductory series,
Okay.
moves into a middle analytical series,
Mm-hmm.
and culminates in a concluding series with the rather grand title, Mathesis Megiste,
Wow.
which translates to Supreme Teaching.
It sounds like he's taking us on a carefully structured journey through his philosophical world.
Exactly.
And the structure mirrors his method of exposition.
Yes,
He begins with an abstract synthesis.
like a bird's eye view of the landscape,
Then he breaks things down analytically.
examining each element in detail.
Finally, he builds back up to a concrete synthesis in the Mathesis Megiste.
Revealing the full picture, the interconnectedness of it all.
And get this. The volumes in the first and third series are organized according to Pythagorean categories.
Oh.
The first volume focuses on unity, the second on opposition, and so on.
That's interesting. What are these Pythagorean categories,
Yeah.
and why are they so important to Dos Santos?
Imagine the Pythagorean categories as fundamental building blocks of reality.
Okay.
The ancient philosopher Pythagoras believed that numbers held the key to understanding the universe. And these categories represent different numerical principles.
Okay.
For example, the category of unity represents the number 1, the origin of all things.
Right.
The category of opposition represents the number 2, the duality that creates tension and dynamism.
Right.
Dos Santos was fascinated by this ancient system and saw it as a framework for organizing his own philosophical insights.
So, it's like he's using these ancient numerical principles as a scaffolding to construct his own philosophical edifice.
Precisely.
And the Mathesis Megiste represents the culmination of this construction, the grand unveiling of his complete philosophical system.
Yeah.
He envisioned it as a universe of discourse, valid for all spheres of knowledge.
It's a bold claim, but then again, Dos Santos wasn't one for shying away from ambition.
True.
Now that we have a sense of his overall approach, let's delve into the heart of his system.
Right here.
these so-called eternal laws. What are they?
At the core of his system are 10 fundamental laws.
Okay.
And as you might have guessed, this system is also deeply rooted in Pythagorean thought, specifically the concept of the tetractys.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but also a little lost.
Sure.
What's the tetractys?
Imagine a triangular arrangement of dots.
Okay.
The top row has 1 dot, the second row has 2, the third has 3, and the bottom row has 4,
Okay.
adding up to 10. This seemingly simple arrangement held profound significance for the Pythagoreans.
Yeah.
They saw it as a representation of the fundamental order of the universe, the underlying structure of reality.
So Dos Santos is taking this ancient symbol and using it as a framework for his 10 fundamental laws.
Exactly.
He saw these laws as categories of being, eternal principles governing all things.
Particularly those things existing in the finite realm, the world we experience with our senses.
Okay.
But these laws aren't just abstract concepts floating around in some philosophical ether.
You're saying they have real-world implications,
Absolutely.
that they can help us understand our own lives.
Dos Santos believed that by understanding these laws, we could unlock a deeper understanding of ourselves, our relationships, and the world around us.
Okay.
He meticulously demonstrated and explained each law, connecting them to concepts like unity, opposition, relation, reciprocity, form, harmony, evolution, assumption, integration,
Wow, that's a lot.
and the transcendent unity of the decade.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack, but I'm starting to see the potential here.
It's like he's giving us a set of lenses through which to view reality.
That's a great way to put it.
And the key to understanding his system is grasping the concept of tension.
Yes.
It's through the interplay of tension between these laws that his system comes to life.
He uses them to tackle some of the biggest philosophical questions,
Right.
like the nature of good and evil, the process of evolution, and our relationship to the universe.
Okay, my mind is officially buzzing.
I hear you.
Before we dive into each of these 10 laws, I think we need to give our listener a chance to catch their breath.
Okay.
We'll pick up right where we left off in part 2 of this deep dive into the fascinating world of Mário Ferreira dos Santos.
Sounds good. Welcome back. You've journeyed through the fascinating life of Mário Ferreira dos Santos and gotten a glimpse of his ambitious encyclopedia, the Ciencias Filosóficas. And we've started to unpack his 10 fundamental laws, based on that ancient Pythagorean symbol, the tetractys. But I'm still a bit fuzzy on how these laws actually work.
Sure.
Can you give us a more concrete example?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's take the first law. The law of unity dos Santos starts with a very simple premise. Nothing comes from nothing.
Right.
Therefore, the very foundation of reality must be something,
Okay.
something that affirms itself,
Okay.
and that something is being.
Okay. I think I'm following so far. Being or existence is the fundamental starting point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because being is one, it's governed by the law of unity. Everything that exists, everything we can even conceive of, must be a unity. Dos Santos uses the number 1 to symbolize this law,
Okay.
just like this single dot at the top of the tetractys.
So it's like the Big Bang of his philosophical system, the initial singularity from which everything else emerges.
That's a great analogy. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
He talks about how this primal unity,
Okay.
the supreme being, gives rise to a second one, which he calls the sun.
Okay.
Now, you might think this is getting into religious territory,
Right.
but Dos Santos is working within a purely philosophical framework.
So no need to grab our Bibles just yet.
Not for this deep dive. What Dos Santos is getting at is the relationship between pure being and the act of creation.
Okay.
He describes the supreme being as pure will, the power to be.
Okay.
And the sun represents the intellect, the one who carries out the act of creation, bringing forth the multiplicity of the universe from the unity of being.
Okay, that's a pretty mind-blowing concept. So the first law establishes being.
Yes.
But the second law, the law of opposition, symbolized by the number 2, is where things start to get a bit more, well, complicated.
In a way, yes, Dos Santos argues that everything in the finite realm, the world we experience,
Right.
is born from the tension between the act of creation and the potential to be created.
Okay.
He uses the terms formative act and materializable potency to describe this dynamic interplay.
Those are some seriously hefty philosophical terms. Can you break that down for us non-philosophers?
Think of it like a sculptor in a block of clay.
Okay.
The sculptor represents the formative act, the active force shaping and molding. The clay represents the materializable potency, the potential to be formed into something.
So the law of opposition is all about the tension between the force that shapes and the potential to be shaped. It's like the push and pull that gives rise to everything we see and experience.
Exactly. And this tension isn't something to be avoided.
Right.
It's the very engine of creation, the driving force behind evolution and change. Dos Santos places this law second only to the law of unity,
Okay.
because it's essential to the very structure of existence.
Okay. I'm starting to see how these laws build on each other. So we've got being, we've got opposition. What comes next?
The law of relation, symbolized by the number 3. If you have two opposing forces,
Yeah.
there has to be some kind of relationship between them, right? Dos Santos argues that this isn't just any random connection,
Okay.
but a fundamental principal relationship,
Okay.
without which being itself couldn't emerge.
It's like the glue that holds the universe together, the force that allows those opposing forces to interact and create something new.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's from this relationship that form and matter arise, the building blocks of the physical world.
All right. So far, we've got the unity of being, the tension of opposition, and the connection of relation. What's the fourth law that Dos Santos brings into this mix?
The fourth law, symbolized by the number 4, is the law of reciprocity. This is where the dynamic interplay between those opposing forces really comes to the forefront. Dos Santos argues that these forces aren't just passive recipients of the creative act.
Right.
They push back, they influence each other, they reciprocate. He even uses the example of the Chinese yin-yang symbol to illustrate this concept.
That's a great visual. It's like a cosmic dance, with each partner responding to the other's movements.
Yes.
Creating a pattern that's both intricate and constantly evolving.
Exactly. And this reciprocity is essential for understanding how finite beings, like you and me,
Yeah.
act and interact in the world. It's not a one-way street. There's a constant exchange,
Right.
a give and take that shapes everything.
This is making me think about Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction.
You're catching on. It's that same principle at work,
Right.
but applied to a much broader philosophical framework.
Okay, I'm ready for the next layer of complexity. What's the fifth law that Dos Santos lays out?
The fifth law, symbolized by the number 5, is the law of form. Now, form might seem like a pretty basic concept,
Yeah.
but Dos Santos gives it a very specific meaning within his system.
So it's not just about how something looks on the outside.
Not at all. It's about the internal structure,
Okay.
the underlying blueprint that determines the essence of a thing.
Okay.
Think of it like the DNA of an organism or the architectural plan of a building.
So form is what makes a thing what it is, what gives it its unique identity.
Precisely. And it's also what allows us to distinguish one thing from another. Dos Santos sees form as the logos, the intrinsic principle of proportionality that governs the interaction of opposites within a being.
Okay, back up a second. We've got all this unity, opposition, relation, reciprocity swirling around. Yeah.
How does form bring order to the chaos?
Think of form as the organizing principle. It's the force that brings harmony to the interplay of those seemingly chaotic forces.
Right.
Remember the law of reciprocity, that cosmic dance we talked about? Well, that dance takes place within the boundaries established by form.
So form is like the choreographer, setting the steps and making sure the dance doesn't devolve into a mosh pit.
Exactly. Form prevents the symphony from descending into cacophony. It's the guiding principle that ensures the interplay of opposites results in a unified and coherent whole.
This makes me wonder about beauty.
Yeah.
Is there a connection between form and beauty in Dos Santos' system?
Absolutely. Dos Santos believed that beauty arises from the harmonious arrangement of parts, from the perfect expression of form.
Okay.
He sees human beings as uniquely capable of perceiving and appreciating beauty because we have the capacity to grasp those forms, to understand the underlying order of the universe.
So it's like we have this built-in form detector, this ability to recognize and appreciate the patterns that make things beautiful. And he even links this capacity to the symbolic significance of the number 5, which he sees as representing the human being.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued by these numerical connections, but before we get too sidetracked, let's move on to the sixth law. What's the law of harmony, and how does it fit into all of this?
The law of harmony, symbolized by the number 6, takes us beyond the internal structure of individual beings and explores how they function as parts of larger wholes.
Okay.
Dos Santos argues that every finite being is part of a larger totality, a plethos, as he calls it.
Right.
And this totality has a certain cohesion, a force that holds it together.
So we're zooming out, looking at how individuals fit into families, communities, societies, even the cosmos as a whole.
Exactly. And he argues that for a being to function properly, there needs to be harmony between its parts.
Yeah.
The different elements within a being must work together in a coordinated way, just like the organs in our body.
Right.
Each organ has its own specific role, but they all operate in harmony for the greater good of the organism.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about conflict? Isn't conflict a natural part of life? How does that fit into this picture of harmony?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And Dos Santos doesn't shy away from it. He doesn't see conflict as inherently negative. In fact, he argues that harmony implies disharmony,
Really?
because its disharmony is simply a new harmony in opposition to an older one. It's through the resolution of these conflicts, through the establishment of a new harmony, that evolution occurs.
So it's not about avoiding conflict, but about learning to navigate it in a way that leads to greater harmony, to growth and evolution. Which brings us to the seventh law, the law of evolution, symbolized by the number 7.
Yes, and Dos Santos's concept of evolution is much broader than just biological evolution.
Oh.
He sees it as a fundamental principle governing all of existence, the process by which beings move from one state of harmony to another, constantly striving for greater integration and wholeness.
This is starting to feel pretty cosmic. It's like he's describing the grand unfolding of the universe, from the Big Bang to the emergence of consciousness.
And he sees this unfolding as happening in leaps and bounds, not as a smooth, linear progression. He uses the term specific jumps to describe these sudden transitions from one level of being to another, driven by the inherent tension and dynamism of the previous laws.
It's like that caterpillar transforming into a butterfly. It's not gradual, it's a radical metamorphosis.
A perfect example.
Oh.
But I have a question for you. What happens when a being reaches the end of its evolutionary cycle? Is that it?
Yeah.
Game over.
That's a good question. I'm guessing Dos Santos has an answer for that, too.
He does. And it leads us to the eighth law, the law of assumption, symbolized by the number 8.
Correct.
He also uses the term transformation to describe this law.
Assumption. Transformation. These words sound almost mystical. What do they mean in this context?
He's talking about a process that goes beyond ordinary evolution,
Okay.
a kind of transcendence, a leap to a higher order of being.
Wow.
Think of it like death and rebirth, but on a cosmic scale. When a being reaches the limits of its current form, it doesn't simply cease to exist.
Right.
Rather, it undergoes a transformation, an assumption, into a new form, a new level of existence.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. Evolution, transformation.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
The ninth law, symbolized by the number 9, is the law of integration. All these evolutionary leaps and transformations ultimately lead towards a final integration into the totality,
Okay.
into the universal order.
Yeah.
It's like all these individual journeys are ultimately converging towards a common destination,
Okay.
a final unity.
So even though there's all this tension and dynamism and change, there's also an underlying movement towards wholeness,
Yes.
towards a coming together.
That's the essence of it. Dos Santos sees this process of integration as the ultimate goal of all existence, the fulfillment of all those individual strivings for harmony and wholeness.
Okay, we've explored 9 laws, each building on the previous one, revealing a more and more complex picture of reality. What's the 10th and final law that brings this philosophical symphony to a close?
The 10th law is the law of the decade, symbolized by the number 10, representing the completion of the Tetractys. This is where Dos Santos brings it all together, reminding us that all those previous 9 laws operate simultaneously,
Right.
governing everything in the universe, whether we're aware of them or not.
It's like a grand unified theory of existence, a set of principles that underlie and connect everything. But is he saying these are universal laws, or is this just his own philosophical framework?
Dos Santos was convinced that these 10 laws weren't just arbitrary constructs,
Okay.
but reflections of the eternal principles that govern the cosmos.
Wow.
He believed he was mapping the very structure of reality itself.
Well, that's a bold claim, but he certainly didn't shy away from ambition.
Not at all. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Dos Santos goes on to derive even more complex laws from these 10 fundamental principles,
Really?
creating a vast and intricate network of interconnected ideas.
Wow.
He calls them binary, ternary, and quaternary laws, building up layer upon layer of philosophical insight.
Hold on, I need a moment to process all this. My mind is reeling from all these laws and principles. Let's take a break here and give our listener a chance to absorb all this incredible information. We'll pick up with these higher order laws in part 3 of our deep dive into the fascinating world of Mário Ferreira dos Santos. Welcome back to our deep dive into the mind-bending world of Mário Ferreira dos Santos. We've explored his life, his monumental work, the Encyclopedia de Ciencias Filosóficas, and we've even begun to unravel his 10 fundamental laws.
Laws that he believed were woven into the very fabric of reality. based on that ancient Pythagorean symbol of the tetractys.
Right, but you mentioned that he didn't stop there. He went on to create even more laws, something he called binary, ternary, and quaternary laws. My brain is already full. How do these even work?
Think of it like building a philosophical pyramid.
Okay.
The 10 fundamental laws form the solid base. But Dos Santos wanted to explore all the possible connections and implications to see how these laws interacted and built upon each other.
So it's like he's creating a map of all the possible relationships within his system, showing how everything connects.
Exactly. He begins by combining two fundamental laws to create a binary law.
Okay.
For example, he combines the law of unity and the law of relation to form the principle that every unity in the context of beta has intrinsic relationships between its elements. Remember, context beta is how he refers to the finite realm, the world we experience.
Okay, so it's like taking two ingredients and combining them to create a new flavor. Each ingredient still exists on its own, but together they create something more complex.
A perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And he doesn't stop there. He combines 3 laws to create ternary laws, 4 laws to create quaternary laws, and so on. It's a bit like that recursive image of the Mandelbrot set, where patterns repeat themselves at different scales, revealing infinite complexity.
Okay, my head is spinning a bit. Can you give us a concrete example of how one of these higher order laws might play out in the real world?
Let's take that ternary law we just mentioned, the one that combines unity, opposition, and harmony. Dos Santos argues that the harmony in the oppositions intrinsic to a unity promotes the cycle of evolution.
Okay.
In other words, for a being to evolve, the opposing forces within it must be balanced and working together in a coordinated way.
So it's not enough to just have conflict or tension. Those forces need to be in harmony to create progress.
Exactly. If those forces are out of balance, it can lead to stagnation or even destruction.
Yeah.
But when they're working together, like a well-oiled machine, that's when we see growth, creativity, and evolution.
This is making me think about how we navigate challenges in our own lives. If we can find a way to harmonize those opposing forces, to find the balance between pushing forward and accepting limitations, maybe that's the key to personal growth.
That's a great insight, and I think Dos Santos would agree. He saw these laws as operating at every level of existence, from the individual to the universal.
This brings up another question for me. If everything is striving for harmony and integration, where does evil fit into all of this? It seems like a pretty big wrench in the works.
That's a question that has plagued philosophers for centuries, and Dos Santos offers a unique perspective. He doesn't see evil as a fundamental principle, an equal and opposite force to good.
Oh.
Rather, he sees it as a consequence of the disruption of harmony.
So evil is like a glitch in the system, a breakdown of the natural order.
In a sense, yes. When the opposing forces within a being or a system fall out of balance, that's when we see corruption, decay, and what we might call evil. But he even sees this as a necessary part of the evolutionary process.
Okay, now you're really blowing my mind. You're saying evil can be a catalyst for growth.
Think of it like a forest fire.
Okay.
It can be incredibly destructive, but it also clears away deadwood and makes way for new growth. Dos Santos believed that even in the midst of decay and corruption, there's always the potential for regeneration, for the emergence of a new and higher order.
It's like that saying, out of the ashes, a phoenix shall rise.
Exactly. And this is the heart of Dos Santos's philosophical vision. A vision of a universe governed by eternal laws, where everything is interconnected and in constant flux, striving towards a state of ultimate harmony and unity.
This has been an incredible journey. I have to admit, I'm a little overwhelmed. We've explored the life of this relatively unknown Brazilian philosopher, delved into his monumental work, and attempted to grasp his intricate system of laws.
And we've only scratched the surface. There are so many layers to Dos Santos's thought, so many connections waiting to be made.
So where do we go from here? What can our listener take away from this deep dive?
I think Dos Santos would encourage us to keep exploring, to keep asking questions, to keep seeking a deeper understanding of ourselves and the universe we inhabit.
And maybe, just maybe, by understanding these eternal laws, we can begin to see the hidden connections that bind us all together, the underlying harmony that unites even the most seemingly disparate elements of existence.
Perhaps we could even catch a glimpse of that ultimate unity that lies at the heart of all things.
We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to explore further. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the mysteries of the universe.